So hey, really quick, guys, for everybody attending, this is going to be awesome, right? This is going to be a panel talking about using assessments responsibly, how to use them, what they should include, when to use them. We're going to cover all of these topics. Your questions come first. So we have planned out questions, right? But at the end of the day, we're here to help guide you guys on what will be the most beneficial, the best ways to use these assessments, or any other things that you guys want to know. So we do have some questions that we want to go over. I will be keeping time on everyone, so I'm going to apologize now because I am going to be the one who says, hey, you have 10 seconds, and like bring in like the hook for you. So real quick introductions for everybody. I'm going to give everybody 30 seconds to introduce yourselves. And I'm using an Apple Watch to time all of the 30 seconds. We are going to go in, just to mess with everybody, last name alphabetical order. Michael, if you're looking, if that's you or not, that's you. So please unmute. 30-second introduction. Who are you? What do you do? Why are you so awesome?
Cheers, Batman. Michael Blakely. I'm the co-founder of Equitas. We're an interview software platform that helps companies reduce bias from their hiring process. Background, freelance interviewer and assessor, 10,000 plus interviews, my claim to fame. So hopefully can add a good bit of content today and tell you a bit about some of the clients I've worked for in the past. So less than 30.
Whoa, way less than 30. Like, where do you work? You can share it. Oh, no, he's good. He's out. All right. Reverse order. Jane, we're on you.
You, Batman. Can you hear me?
Sure can.
You can see I am the only one who's here in the nighttime, me and Vanessa. But I'm super excited to be here. Thank you so much to everyone. I am passionate about the human connection and about helping companies to hire the right people, but not just that, but to really create a very positive, respectful candidate experience that people go away feeling dignified and more courageous than when they entered the process. So that's super important to me. And I also love helping people navigate their interview process. The Apple Watch says stop, so I'll stop.
Boom. That was good. No, that was pretty good, actually. It was pretty good. Dan, why don't you jump on in?
Am I next? Is my 30 seconds started yet? Can you hear me?
Boom.
Okay, cool. It all started in 1976 when I know that may probably be a bit silly to do that. That's when my birthday was. There you go. No, I co-founded a company called Your Flock, and Your Flock is a personal development and remote working teams tool. It's pretty funky. Go and have a look. But also I do talks on future of work, and I work a bit with the BBC and do some stuff on LinkedIn. So I get asked to come along to these things. Hopefully I can add some value without my phone going off every couple of minutes. So yeah, that's why am I awesome. I talk a lot for a job.
Dude, that was almost exactly 30 seconds. That was all right. We're on the same page, you and I. All right. Next, we have Crystyl Swanson.
All right. Well, I'm going to start with why I'm awesome, which is there's so many things. But I'll just say that I'm awesome because I really love to help, and I'm super interested and obsessed with assessments. So much so that I've continued to get certifications in them. I'm currently certified in 4. I'm looking for 20 by the end of next year. Love assessments, love people, really love human behavior. I'm the founder of Ranga, which is basically how do we revolutionize engagement? Dang it. And I currently work for Mercer in commercial strategy.
Boom. That was pretty good. That was pretty good. All right. For all attendees, if you guys have questions, please pop them in the Q&A section on the right-hand side. I will be monitoring that as we go. Again, your questions will take precedence over ours. So I wanted to start with everybody, and again, we're going to be timing everybody's answers, so apologies. Either speak very quickly or super thoughtfully. The first part I wanted to go over with everybody, and I think we were all on the same page when we discussed this, was when do we use assessments, right? And I think starting looking at it from like a recruiting and a job seeking perspective would be the best way to start. So like when in the recruiting process, how should they be used? Like, can we talk a little bit about using the assessments during that process and for that process. Who would like to go first? I'm going to limit it to about 2 minutes per person, roughly. Give a little leeway. Who wants to go
I have some thoughts on that.
Go for it.
I think that you should use assessments in sort of the final stages of interview process, not to remove a candidate, but to understand more about how that candidate can fit into your team. And so that's a very clear indication. You want to make sure you're not using them for like sort of sorting someone out because they think differently than you, but it's almost more about sorting someone in so that you can get a whole brain approach and that they think differently. So that's my view. Use those assessments as they're getting to final round and you're trying to incorporate, you know, who would be the best fit for the team from that perspective.
Okay, I'm going to delve into that with you, and I think everybody else in our next set of questions. I want to come back to that best fit idea. Who else wants to share on this? When to use assessments? How? Jane. Jane, need to unmute the microphone. Yes,
I'm trying. Things a little slow here down under. But I just wanted to say I totally agree with Crystyl. I think I've seen so many situations where clients have almost used an assessment as a replacement for their own thinking and their own judgment. And I think that's very dangerous when people stop applying their minds and start relying on something instead of that, especially when they use assessments that are not valid and not reliable. So in South Africa, especially with our diverse population, we've got to find assessments that are really good at helping us hire more diverse candidates, and that don't screen out people because they're different in culture in terms of how the assessment is set up.
Love that. Also bleeding right into our next part of all of this. Michael, you are unmuted. I assume you're up next here.
Yeah, I was just going to add to what Jane and Crystyl had said there. So it depends on the type of assessment. If you're talking on the personality questionnaire style of thing, I completely agree with Crystyl, and that sort of heavier, longer kind of assessment you can save to the end, but don't just use it as the only part of the selection process. Me and you have talked about this before, Batman. There's lots of cool technology and tools out there for the early stage assessments as well. Some of them can actually add lots of value. I think some of the examples in my past, simple things to start with that everyone here has probably done or been involved with, like situational judgment tests, really role and company specific, that can actually help the candidate say, oh, is this what I'd be doing day in, day out? Is this right for me? I didn't get any of these decisions really right as well. Maybe I wouldn't be a good fit for the role. So it depends, and it's being right for the role as well. I've been involved with absolutely everything throughout my time whenever they were doing really complicated assessments for entry-level roles that didn't marry up or tied up to like what the role might actually involve, where it would have been simpler just doing a really simple interview or selection process at the start, right through to the other way around where it's really senior roles and people are just doing it over like a coffee style meeting. So it depends on the type of assessment, can add loads of value. But what I think is if it's realistic to the actual role that you're applying for, it can add so much value. And there's some awesome tools out there as well. Things like one I always love to recommend to people, Thrive Map is amazing for that super job. Well.
Awesome. All right, Dan.
Yeah, sorry, I was busy listening to Michael's words of wisdom, and all of yours, in fact, because you have huge amounts of experience in this area. And well, Batman, of course, you're a great facilitator. We know this. I mean, this comes as part of the course. I was just pontificating how great Michael was, as well, of course. I work for a very, very small tech startup, so we're very, very different in that respect. But I'm not going to argue against anyone here because that is not my job to do so. The assessments thing, there's lots of different tools out there, and of course, Flock would just be one thing that you could use. I just want to highlight that where we're used by recruiters and other folk tends to be pretty laid on in the process. Yeah, because what we're about is and I wish it was earlier personally, because what we're really about is looking at someone's values and then recruiting them based on values, not based on other stuff you guys might be talking about. So not about personality types, not about, do you want to go for a beer with them, not about culture fit, which terminology I don't particularly enjoy, but actually about the deeper thing, the thing underneath all of it, which is your values. Not your values are you a Trump supporter, or are you are you a greenie or a hippie like myself? It's not about that. It's actually about, are you into teamwork? Which attributes are you under? So it's not value but values, your motivating drivers. And I don't know where you guys would put that in the assessment test. I've always been arguing it should go earlier, but people seem to use it later.
You would love it, Dan, for Airbnb. They do it right at the end, and they have a values-based interview whenever they were scaling, and that was one thing that they never lost sight of. Not even early on. Final stage interview, everyone did a values-based interview as well, which was super successful for them. But not everyone always agrees on values. You know, sometimes people, like, I remember when it was Google, it turned into Googliness, was just a sift for, I did not like this person. It was just like, how do you define this? What's the success criteria? And like the rest of their process is super robust. Yeah. But whenever it came to that Googly value, they didn't define it. And I think they've worked on it a lot since then.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the whole thing. It's not about Googliness or do I like them as a person. It's the 9 values around the place, which are attributes. And they're very easy, like things like autonomy or teamwork or caring, all these things. And that creates a culture map, which you could then argue is the Googliness of something. But again, I wouldn't go anywhere near that. Anyway, so it's not about right or wrong. It's about how much do you key. And this is really key. And Jane was just picking on what Jane said. This actually allows you to get more diversity into the company. It allows them to be more inclusive because you're recruiting based on value and values, not on the rest.
Awesome. I want to bring this back and kind of build on what you guys were just saying, right? So Michael and Dan, you guys just riffed for a second on corporate culture, right? Identifying those values and kind of understanding, do the values line up, right? And I think a lot of that speaks to what is your corporate culture, right? How do you define that? Because at the end of the day, hiring diversity, which this is the last piece I want to go into with everybody, is important, but the need to fit within the culture, so to speak, seems to be this nebulous term, right, that people throw out, right? Wasn't a culture fit, right? But like, what's your culture? Like, we have a ping pong table and a kombucha machine on tap. Yeah. Those are stuff you do. So I'd like to ask you guys 2-part questions. 1, what's your definition of corporate culture? And 2, what are ways that people can identify their culture and change it? So for this one, we'll give a little bit longer to answer. We'll give like 3 minutes, 3.5 minutes per person. Who would like to go first?
I'll jump in. I don't know who Dan's pointing to because we don't know where we all are on his screen. I won't go for my full 3.5 first off, but thinking of what Dan said about culture fit, I think culture fit should be based on values, but I think what I've seen in my training workshops with corporate companies is when I ask them to identify what their culture is, they don't always know. And they don't always refer back to their values, nor do they even always know what their values are. So I think first off, what's most important is that the people in the organization understand what the values are, but again, not just the headline of it, but what the real definition of it is. Because we could all have the same value, but it might show up in different behaviors based on our culture and where we come from. So for example, respect in the South African context might look quite different when it comes down to behaviors, depending what culture you're coming from. So I think it's really important to define it.
Dan, I like your pretend freeze. Jane, we lost you.
Have we lost Mike as well?
Yes.
No, but if I unmute myself on my board, it would help. Okay, so when Jane gets back, we're going to expect her to pick up on the exact word she left off on, which is perfect. Jane, you are texting back, but your face is frozen, and it's a great freeze face, by the way. It's not a bad one. Whenever you can get back in, connection-wise, maybe refresh the page. We'll let you come back up here.
So I'll pop in while we're waiting for Jane to come back. So my definition of corporate or culture is basically values, attitudes, standards, and beliefs that are going to characterize certain members or members of an organization to sort of define the nature or the environment that you're in. at the end of the day. That's how I would define corporate culture or culture. And then the things that I think impact that is, whether or not it's a loose or tight cultures. There's really some interesting studies, and I actually was just listening to a podcast on this on NPR around how cultures are defined. I'll give more information as a resource, but I think that's how I define corporate culture. Just pause there.
Pause. Jane, back to you. Hit us with the awesomeness.
Where did I end off? Where did you last hear me?
The last thing you said was the. So go.
Thanks, that really helps.
Yeah.
I think what I was trying to say, so this might repeat, but that it's companies need to know what their values are. Their employees need to know what their values are, but not just the headline. They need to know what the definition is. So that needs to be clearly articulated in terms of behaviors, because everyone can agree, yes, our value is respect, but respect can look very different from a behavioral perspective, depending on our cultural background or where we're coming from. So some of that might be new, some of that might have been a repeat that I said before so yeah, there we go.
Awesome. Who wants to step in? That seems like you don't want me to talk on this. I go by Batman. I'm the worst example of defining corporate culture.
I'm going to let Michael do it first, which is beautifully proving that we're both British and therefore getting in each other's way in a queue. So there you go. That defines culture for a second. I'll let you go first, though.
Cheers, Dan. I'm not an expert whenever it comes to culture, and being at an early stage company as well, it's difficult to build out from scratch one. Like, you can write down what's important to you, the values, what you aspire to be, but until you're living it day in, day out, working it, it's really hard to define exactly what your culture is. Where I've seen it for the organizations that I've worked for in the past, and whenever I was at Transport for London, some of the things that Jane was talking about there and behaviors, they had a really strong behavioral framework throughout. So it didn't matter what the job competency was that you're asking questions around. They also assess behaviors throughout, which is really good, because you could see someone who's maybe got all the skills and sounds amazing, but some really negative behaviors could come out, which would maybe, sort of highlight whether they were a good fit for the team or role, and depending whether they're working within a team for the role as well. But yeah, it's difficult to hire against, and I don't know if the rest of you on the panel will agree with me. If you hire purely based on culture fit, it becomes a bit of an opt-out whenever it comes to diversity and inclusion. Some organizations just twist it and can use it to sort of say, look, we need people to be identical, think of the same way as us. And that can be really a negative approach to take in the long run. So a lot of people, I don't know if it's my thought bubble on LinkedIn, have sort of been talking about culture ad as well. And so it's not just sort of saying, like, here's exactly what we're looking for. But if someone's really cool, bringing something different to the table and something you've not seen before, adding that in can be so much more useful in the long run. So not a culture expert, so do not take what I say verbatim. The other three people around this table probably know more than I do.
Oh, I'm gonna disagree slightly with you there, because I most probably don't. But if you can hear me, that's great. And I'm going to throw in slightly different thoughts, which is most probably what culture isn't. Yeah. So company culture and corporate culture. I think we've got to be really careful as well when we say corporate culture, because I don't particularly like the word corporate culture, but that's okay that we use it. And company culture. What company culture isn't, as you say, is a foosball table and ping pong things and all these bits at the top that you see, because that's what really cool companies did, and then loads of other companies did that because that's what they thought would be successful. And of course, that's the cart before the horse and completely the wrong way around. So that isn't what it is. But I'd also give you a little stat from England. If someone isn't aligned with the company culture, then they are, I think 34% of people will leave a job because they're not aligned with company culture. So it's pretty important you get a handle on it, by the way. And that's actually what your flock is designed to do, is to map out your company culture. That's the point of it, but not your brand's culture, because I do marketing lots. So it's not about your brand values, yeah? And your brand values on the wall have nothing to do with company culture. That is just stuff you put on a wall. So it's not the stuff on the wall, it's not the stuff you buy, it's how the people act. And as I just alluded to in my little story with Michael, there's a certain Britishness about the queue system. Well, that Britishness is a culture, but that isn't something we're necessarily told to do all the time. There is signs saying queue up, but there's no sign saying be polite. So you've got to be careful that we look at company culture, especially corporate culture, and say, oh, it's our brand values, because actually it's not. It's what people will say about you when they leave your company.
Another tip on the British one: if we say something's interesting, the underlying subtext there is it's the most awful thing that we've ever seen. So just to let you know, that's what they always say.
I didn't think, Dan, that you needed to have a text that said "be polite" on the queue. If you're British, I thought like being polite was ingrained in your DNA from the day you were born, like mushy peas.
That's absolutely, yeah. We are the most polite nation.
Yeah.
Also, your accent just makes you polite. Like if you say it, it's like, oh, he just, delivered a crap sandwich and I'm smiling, so it must be good.
It did sound really nice. Guys, we have 2 questions we're going to jump into. First question is, where can you get assessment certifications beyond DISC, etc.? Like I think they're referring to beyond the normal, like Myers-Briggs, Gallup Strength Finders, DISC. Where can you find some other certifications to get in this space?
So in the UK, go ahead.
I'm in North America, but I can provide some resources around where these certifications come from. There's a lot of great ones in North America, whether or not you want to be a facilitator or just be certified and being able to understand it. So I'll certainly send those out. Probably too long of a list to go over now, but you can get certifications in anything from emotional intelligence all the way to critical thinking styles, and then you can utilize those not only in recruiting and hiring, but as a way to sort of develop and enhance the culture that you're trying to promote within your organization.
A really handy tip as well for job seekers: if you are being put through some sort of psychometric assessment, ask the HR department, do you mind me asking which provider that you're using? Because they usually have to share who that is, and all of these test publishers and providers have test materials on their website. So if you want to be ahead and sort of tails above the rest of the game, ask in advance, find out who's testing you, and they can share loads. In the UK, who we use, who's the kind of body that would provide a lot of this sort of training as well, is the BPS, so British Psychological Society. They have lots of registered test providers as well. Can be quite expensive to get registered in these different tests, but that people who've gone through their sort of scientific rigor have tested it with lots of different people from different groups and backgrounds, and make sure there's no sort of adverse impact to people from different communities or demographics as well. So that's the one source of truth in the UK. I don't know if Dan would disagree on that, but I think that's the one that I will always go to.
I think the question was coming from as if someone wanted to be a facilitator, right, and really get into like doing assessments themselves for other people, where can they go to get those certifications? Jane?
I think if Crystyl provides her long list, we'll probably be pretty much covered. I think my focus from an assessment perspective is more around the interview expertise. And to have a structured assessment in an interview, in getting people to really tell a story that is real and relevant and relatable, because that's the kind of thing that will build a connection and build a relationship, to be able to try and avoid that unconscious bias that's going to play up if you don't allow people to tell stories. So I think for me, storytelling and eliciting, using the STAR technique, for example, is so key in a structured interview approach, as apart from, the kind of psychometric or ability assessments.
And Jane, I'll just add to that. I totally agree. One thing that I have observed in assessments that are typically used pre-hire is they are very good at trying to give the interviewer questions that will dig deeper into, say, areas of concern or areas where they have found a candidate has excelled when they're trying to sort of match a profile. And that helps just dig in and really understand where that person is coming from culturally, as well as how they respond in a given situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Dan, sorry, you're pointing to someone, but not sure where that person sits on your screen.
I interrupted you, and I apologize.
No problem. Are you pointing to Dan? No. Okay. So I think, Crystyl, what you're saying is so key, and I see corporate clients. Some of them have a really good practice where they allow feedback to the candidates that they've assessed, and they discuss it, because you can't get everything accurately at face value from a written report. So I think that's really, really essential. And something that is also so close to my heart, especially after I spoke to a candidate this week, is how that assessment is presented to the candidate. I mean, she was given no information about it. She couldn't get in touch with anyone. She got presented with this assessment. It took her 3 hours. Then there was a cutoff date. Then they didn't tell her the next part of it would take 3 days. And she was so nervous. She felt like, I don't even know if I want to work for these people. And then afterwards, they were like, no, it was actually an assessment to see how well you'll handle stress. And I think that's so unfair, because it's not even the same type of stress that you'd be experiencing in the job. It's sometimes people come up with their own version of a psychometric assessment that they think, oh, if I just do this or ask that question, you know, what animal best describes you? It's almost like their own little assessment they've created in their mind that's now going to sum up this person for them. And yeah, I think that really hurts the candidate experience.
Yeah, I've got to be honest with you. Yeah, I mean, that is that kind of shenanigans, really, which is why we created Your Flock, because it kind of gets rid of all that bit, because it's really end user led. So the person does the flock test, so to speak, or the survey, do a little 5-minute survey, and then at the end of it, everyone can look at that, and you look at it first. It's your flock profile, yeah, and then people can then look to see how you fit into the team if everyone's done the flock profile. So it's much more from an end user basis, if that makes sense. You do it yourself, and then the recruiters use it afterwards. We're most probably doing something very, very different in the tech world, in the community. What we found is that people who use Your Flock tend to hire, because they're hiring on values, they hire more diverse and more inclusively, and that is something that's absolutely key to me. And by the way, it's not just key to me because I am brown with dreadlocks. It obviously is quite important, and I have a daughter, so that's quite important. And I'm quite old, so heck, I'm ticking lots of boxes, so to speak. But no, it's not completely altruistic. It's actually because companies that have those kind of cultures are actually better and more profitable and more productive, around about 21% more productive if you're more engaged at work. So it's not just a fluffy feely thing, it's actually a real driver for the economy, and that's why it's so important. So you look at something like Apple, and I'll be quiet soon, but look at something like Apple. I'm not saying they've got a great culture, but they have a very cohesive culture, let's say. Now, they are now the top of the FTSE, and they are worth more than 99 of the others in the FTSE 100. That's the difference. That's the bottom line difference a very cohesive culture can make. So, you know, it's not just fluffy. However, I've never gone for a job in Apple. I don't know if they ask, you know, what kind of dog would I like or be. I have no idea. I don't know.
Yeah, those really great points about the random non-real world questions, right? Like when they have software engineers take a whiteboarding test of like, whiteboard your answers. And I'm like, you know, like Google's been around a long time, and like people just search for that stuff, right? It's not a realistic way, right? Like Jane, like how often are people like, hey, hit this deliverable by this date, right? And they get done, and it's like, nah, I was just kidding, just want to see if you could do it for the client, right? It's like, what? That's like, that's sadistic, you know? Next question from the audience. By the way, if you guys are doing that, stop it. It's a terrible practice. Next question from the audience. As a job seeker, how do I figure out if a company's values and mine align? Because here it is, ready? Aren't values shown through the employees? And when they're looking for a job, they typically can't talk to the employees or all of the employees for roles. How would you handle that as a job seeker? Michael.
The assessment process is two-way. So it's you deciding whether you want to work with them with the style and process that they got. So if they've tried to automate absolutely everything and you're fine working that way, and you know maybe you do prefer something like lone working, not engaging with loads of people, then maybe that's the perfect organization for you to work for. But especially when it gets to that final interview stage, you'll be able to tell so much by the way that they deliver that. So is it a nice, open, engaging, transparent conversation? I remember when I used to hire at Aldi, half of the interview was me trying to scare people off, because I said to them, look, you get paid really well, 1.5 times the average salary, but they expect you to do double the work in, you know, about half the time. So it is going to be so difficult that it's unreal. So if they are a half decent, worth their salt interviewer or recruiter at the organization, they'll just paint it as it is, give you a really accurate picture of what's going on. And if it is the most super formal process that you've ever been for, that'll say a lot about them as well. You can have a structured interview that'll still be really relaxed and, you know, can help you get the best out of you as well. Reach out to people in advance as well, just because there's people potentially involved with your hiring process. The first thing, and it was recommended on a few of the talks earlier, reach out to people who currently work in LinkedIn. So just reach out to them, say, can I grab a coffee? Can I ask you about 15 minutes, a bit about the assessment process, a bit about the company? And you'll find more gems and nuggets from those people who actually speak to you as well. They'll tell you, like, here's what it's like to work like, here's the team, here's the reality. And that can help build a bit of a picture, because if you go off the website, okay, you can read what their values are. And like the rest of the panel were saying earlier, it's, you know, potentially something that's just on the wall, not a lot to go by from there. Some of them live it, some of them don't. But reaching out to people who work there will stand you in good stead. And just even what the process is like itself, if it's like Jane's one and they're waking you up halfway in the night to say, finish this assessment, it's just like, actually, maybe this isn't the best place for me to work.
Flag. Yeah, definitely. I mean, you know, the stalking on Glassdoor and the stalking, not stalking, sorry, stalking is the wrong word, but networking on LinkedIn. Researching, absolutely, you know, but yeah, I think LinkedIn is an absolute goldmine, isn't it? You know, and let's not underestimate the power of that particular platform for talking to people you wouldn't normally, especially in times of remote work, especially in times of COVID. So, you know, that door is always open. And so I definitely wholeheartedly say what Michael says, do your research, go on social media, you know, and you know, good luck with all that. I think there's a lot to do.
Crystyl, Jane, any advice for job seekers on how to approach this?
Yeah, so one thing that strikes me is that I have met a lot of people who believe they know what their values are, but they don't really, like they're not actually in touch with them. And so what I would recommend, even though you may feel that you are super strong in what you think you care about, is just taking a simple assessment online that sort of gets to those values and then being able to articulate them in an interview. Because in essence, you're then setting yourself up for being a fit, not being a fit, but also, to Michael's point, interviewing that company. And I'd also say during that interview process, you can look for those red flags per Jane's story. Are they standing out? And you can also ask, hey, I'd like to speak to a peer who's fairly new in the same type of role I'm in, if possible. Maybe one that's been there for a year, and then also a tenured one, because you're going to get 3 different perspectives. And that's really important to how you can interview and make sure you're choosing the right company for you. But I think the one thing that's often overlooked, and I'm guilty of it, I didn't know what my values were until I actually took, and I love assessments, but I took one specifically for values, and I learned that my #1 value is caring. Dan, I took your assessment, it came out that way too. So I just say, try to find a free assessment online, and now I know my Achilles heel or my value that I overuse is I'm caring, so have to watch out for that. And then I also know that that's a virtue that I'm going to bring to an organization.
That's awesome. That's awesome. You are very caring. That is very true. All right. Last question. We're getting controversial right now because I'm leading the panel and I can do what I want. Guys, diversity. All right. I've had this chat before, and like I'm a mid-30s white male in America, so like I'm basically the last person who should be talking about this. But but like, you know, here we are anyway. Here's what I want to know. What is diversity, right? Is it that you're black or brown or white or female or male or more seasoned or less seasoned, or is it something else? And then how can we use assessments to, I think you guys touched on it earlier, not hire more of the same? And here's my thought I'm going to leave you with and let you guys go. If you have a company with, I don't know, 6 Latinx mid-30s executives, graduated an Ivy League school, right? And they hire a white or black mid-30s executive who graduated from an Ivy League school. Is that diversity? Or is that hiring somebody who looks different than you? And with that, I'm going to leave that super controversial note. Hit it.
Grenade and then explosion. That's a good one. Thanks. I'm going to let Jane go first.
Okay, sure. Thank you, Dan. I think that's a great question, and I love what everyone has been sharing so far. And I really resonate with what you're saying, Batman, because in South Africa, I think when we started around employment equity and really trying to encourage companies from a legal perspective to include people who are coming from other cultures and backgrounds in their hiring process, I think what happened is we initially saw people doing what you're saying. They would hire someone maybe of a different color who looks different on the outside, but they would try to get somebody who's as similar to what they were in terms of culture. And that's not necessarily diversity, because as you say, we can be the same color or a different color and be as different or the same as, you know, I mean, it's not just a color thing. It's not just an age thing. It's so much more. So I think it's about using different assessments, maybe like, you know, simple ones like StrengthsFinder or things like that, to really understand what are people's different strengths, what value can they bring to the table, and how does that show up in light of their culture? Because again, we could have the same strengths, but it might show up in different behaviors depending on where we're coming from. So I think that's an important consideration. And I think bias. I mean, I train people all the time in my workshops to be aware of what their own bias is, so that they can go in self-aware and put things in place to mitigate the impact of that. Whether it's cloning, whether it's first impression, whether it's confirmation bias, whatever the case may be, it's so important to not be guided by that. So your panel needs to be diverse. And again, coming back to storytelling, if you get people to tell real stories, then you give yourself a chance to understand them and where they come from. And we know the neuroscience behind stories is it builds connections and it builds relationships. So you can't just ask the theoretical what if questions. It has to be really getting to know people so that you have a chance to connect with each person. So that is my part towards your controversial question, Batman.
That's okay. I'm going to jump in right there because you said stories there. And the reason why I actually invested in Flock a long time ago, a couple of years ago now, feels like a long time when you have a startup, doesn't it, Michael? Michael, it does take, it's like having a baby. It's a very impactful and very intense thing. I've done it about 9 times. Anyway, the story is this. I was about to hire a friend of mine who is a different race to me. He's very, very rich. He's a white guy, very rich. Love him like a brother. I won't tell his name, but I've known him for years. And my hunch was, because we were very, very similar, we work well together. Yeah, that was my foolish thought before. And then he did the Flock test. And it literally, the Flock survey, literally went, wah, 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 just came up with this red light saying, don't hire this guy. Yeah, it will not work if you hire him. Now, I love him as a brother. I literally love him. It's a great guy. Very, very green, very passionate about stuff. I thought we had the same things going on. Completely wrong for the company. Yeah, so I'm going to kind of argue for and against this diversity thing. I think you should all have the same motivators and drivers. Yeah, and that will make a difference. You know, and if you're older, then yeah, you've got some wisdom to bring to the table because you've got more life experience. Cool. And it might be the fact you can be brown, white, or gay, or whatever. Those bits actually you should be doing because you're a nice person. Yeah, that's the bit. You know, we just should be being nice to everyone. That would be cool. Yeah, we shouldn't have to teach people to be nice to each other. However, the technology can help you get over your hunch and get over your bias, as you were saying. Because I would have absolutely hired my friend. Yeah. And he told me like 6 months later, it would have been the worst mistake I ever made. And that's why I invested in Flock, because Flock made me realize that I didn't have all the answers at all. In fact, the answers should have come from him. And that was a bit more of a deeper assessment, because even though I thought I knew him, I've known him for 20 years. It would have been a dreadful hire, a dreadful recruit, which I take a story, a rambling story there, Jane. Sorry, I just grabbed hold of the word story. But diversity is also a group in England. It's a black group in England who do breakdancing. There you go, that's diversity.
So my answer to this controversial question is, I believe along the lines of Jane and really Dan of how do we create diversity within sort of the thinking styles and the backgrounds of people, and whether you're white, black, female, male, doesn't actually matter to me. Whether you have autism, what are you bringing to the table that's different from what we have today? And, you know, speaking of storytelling, Jane, the team I'm on today, I know for sure, after all of the things that happened with the new diversity and inclusion spotlight in the US, I was shared that I was looked at as someone that I don't know if I want on my team because she's super outgoing and she has this very different thinking pattern than we do. They took a chance and now it's been great for what they say, right? But either way, that's an example of a bias, an implicit bias that they had because I was outgoing and I had sort of a brilliant personality, for their own words. But the other piece that I love that you mentioned, and it is around the diversity for the implicit bias, is, equity, I think is really where we should be focusing aside from just D&I, because the equity piece is really what's going to drive inform both of the others, right? Because you have microaggression and you have certain cultural norms that are, managing your equity within a company. Example, pay. So I think that we should be talking about DE&I, not just D&I, but hopefully that helps inform how I think about diversity.
Awesome sauce. Michael, you want to close this out?
I don't know if I could go much further than the other three panelists so far, and yourself as well. Me and you always chat about this, and it's super interesting. So yeah, diversity is the mix, and then inclusion's getting the mix to work well together. And there's lots more to go beyond that. A lot of people talking about belonging in the space. Is that what we need to strive towards as well as equity, like Crystyl mentioned? I'm going to give one back to you, Mike, as well, because I saw in the comments as well talking about it always should be the best person, for the role, ideally what they're hiring for. But what's difficult sometimes, and a lot of the sort of thought leadership that I've kind of been reading and following, is sometimes the way the whole system is set up makes it very difficult for people with different backgrounds themselves to get there. There's some awesome documentaries you can watch from people who come from like different socio-economic backgrounds in England, get the best education possible, and then they'll get knocked back from financial institutions for things like, oh, doesn't have enough polish. And what that translates to is doesn't have a posh accent and cannot talk to our posh clients that we've got there. So the whole system is super, super difficult to start with. And the way I always talk about it, because people sometimes ask me, is just like, why do you care about like diversity and inclusion? Are you not like okay within the system and stuff as well? And you think about it from Northern Ireland perspective. So whenever me and Jane have chatted in the past as well, there's some things that we've done in our country, and it's all been based around religion. So that's not something you can always see on the face of things as well. So the Protestant and Catholic conflict, which tore a whole country apart, but now they've taken so many steps to improve. And like, it came right at the start of it as well. We track demographic information really well in Northern Ireland, especially like that. My whole career, only place I've ever been asked, what's my religion, so that they can make it mixed on a panel as well. So taking little steps like that. And the case study I always tell people about is the police service in Northern Ireland. So historically, super, super Protestant, like nearly like 90% plus. And they had to take positive action to change that. And they put loads of steps in place politically. It was a bit of a bombshell as well on top of that. So, but they've evened it up really well. They've done merit polls either side, built up the number of Catholics that are within the force as well, and taken loads of steps. Now, some people try to replicate the positive action, don't always do it well. But yeah, it's a difficult topic to talk about. There's so much more awareness, and I think everyone's moving past that now to like, what are the practical steps that we can take to make sure the system changes?
Yeah, I think that's the thing, isn't it?
Yeah,
No, I was about to say, you can start talking about quotas and other things like that. And I think the other one to think about is neurodiversity, of course. I don't know if we mentioned it quite enough in the actual, the thinking process, especially because I come from a tech background. I come from a tech and creative background. So we are, renowned for a kind of bro culture and a kind of, and a certain way of doing it. Now, the problem we have, I'm afraid, ladies and gentlemen, is that tech culture creates a certain bias in AI. And that is a much bigger thing that we should be worried about, because if you start letting the AI systems run stuff, which we are doing at the moment, by the way, then it becomes a real big problem, because not just it doesn't recognize black faces, pretty important in facial recognition. That's a bit bloody scary, especially in the police. That's just a little linker, but actually it goes deeper. Now, the other thing I'm going to very quickly mention it though is now at the moment in England, we have a huge number of people going for jobs. Yeah. And so actually the problem you have at the moment is just weight of numbers. Weight of numbers are on recruiters and weight of numbers trying to get stuff done. And I think we've got to be really worried that at the moment, most people are getting jobs through referrals, because that is the cultural capital, isn't it? It's like, who do you know? Well, actually, it's not just that my dad went to Eton, and don't get me wrong, my socioeconomic status is pretty cool because of my parents were in, because I did okay for myself, but that's not the bloody point. It's everyone else. It's 90% of other people. And actually, they don't have the amazing LinkedIn connections, and their net worth is their network, and that network sometimes isn't great, and that is the system problem that Michael's talking about. And I don't know how we get around that, but one way definitely is to start using non-AI but using technology-based solutions to get rid of some of that grunt work, so you don't allow your own personal biases to come in. I know Jane is not 100% behind that at the moment. Technology will get there, Jane. It's going to become more human as time goes on, but we might not be there yet.
Yep. Guys, we are a little bit over, like 6 minutes, but I'm actually presenting next, so I can, and I'm moderating, so I have like full control of what's happening right now. And I think this would be a great panel to continue. So maybe we do like a webinar or something in a week or two, talking a little bit about that technology piece and AI and what that looks for. And I will leave on this note, which is, you should always hire the best person for the job, but you should define, is that best person based on a skill set or diversity of thought, or
sorry,
or is it based on maybe finding someone who's going to challenge the norm in your company? So when people say we want to hire the best fit for the job, yeah, duh. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Is it just that they code in C# and do SQL, or is it something maybe beyond that because, you know, they're a human? So with that, guys, I want to thank the 4 of you. This was excellent. I put all of your LinkedIn links in the chat. You guys are welcome to share your email so people can get in touch. Very, very awesome. Very awesome. Thank you guys for being a part of this.
Thanks, everybody. Honored.
Thanks, Batman. Take care.
Bye. Thank you.